see. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening around the world. My name is Doug Bunke. I'm here in Culver City, California at an Argentinian coffee bar. And right now the construction crew on the street is quiet. So that's good news. So hopefully you can hear me. I'm very excited about this conversation today because Courtney Fingar is someone we've known for a number of years, and I know many of you know Courtney. She is an extraordinary person and resource and an expert in foreign direct investment all over the world, and we're very pleased to be able to have her moderate today's conversation and really appreciate Courtney, not just this collaboration, but others. We're going to be talking about Africa. And so one of the things we were talking about prior to this meeting, as we were getting warmed up, was a meeting we had a week or two ago in Los Angeles. And that day, I had given a presentation to a group about China-US trade and the Canton Fair and the China International Import Expo. And in the US right now, there's a chilliness to China. A little bit of a not a great situation politically. And what I talked to them about was my 1988 visit to China at a time when I was a young engineer and 300 automotive engineers showed up in Beijing, and we didn't even know that China had an automotive industry at that time. That was 35 years ago, and it was very different than it is today. The reason there were 300 people in the room was that my company, the DuPont company, which you probably know from like Teflon and neoprene and products like that, they had gotten into China in 1917. So they've been there for 105 years ago. So the reason they came to my event was not because of me. They didn't know who I was, but they came because DuPont had been there 100 years earlier. And so one of the things that I think is so critically important for us to recognize is that Africa is a tremendous opportunity. It's in my lifetime, the next decades, shorter than most of you, we're going to see a huge transformation. And a lot of that's going to be coming from the mentality changes that are going to happen, like it did for China, to export from Africa. The mentality changes to create transparent systems across Africa and all the countries, hopefully, or as many as possible, to create investment opportunities that are safe and transparent and attract the world. That's going to be happening. It's finally happening in Africa. And so I'm very pleased that we can talk about that today, about where some of the best opportunities are. And there's really nobody better to moderate that than Courtney Fingar. So Courtney, please take it away. We look forward to the conversation.
Thank you so much, Doug, and I'm obviously grateful for the collaboration. And just to introduce myself, I'm a consultant specialized in foreign direct investment. I run my own firm called Fingar Direct Investment. Previously, I was a longtime journalist focused on the topic. I'm also an advisory board member of the Global Chamber in London. And I think this is a really exciting opportunity to bring a few pieces together. One, which is that the Global Chamber has a very strong presence in Africa, which we'll hear more about in a moment. But as Doug contextualized extremely well, this is quite a moment for Africa, especially as relates to my pet topic of foreign direct investment. There's very strong investor interest in Africa. And also at this time, when global value chains are shifting around, it's sort of like puzzle pieces moving around. And Africa has a really priceless opportunity to establish its place in the global value chain. So we'll talk a bit about what that looks like, what the opportunities are. We'll do a focus on some key investment sectors. And we will hear, importantly, from investors and get their perspective on the opportunities, but also any remaining blockers. So thank you all for joining us, and thanks in advance to our fantastic group of speakers. So let's go ahead and get started. And I'd like to ask Derek Benga, who's Executive Director of the Global Chamber Nairobi chapter, to tell us what the Chamber has going on the continent.
Thank you, Courtney, and thank you, Doug, and hello, everybody. Yeah, this is Derek, all the way from Nairobi, Kenya. It is about 6 p.m. in the evening, so I am delighted to be talking to you today. Some of you may know me as the executive director here in Nairobi. And actually, the news is I am the outgoing executive director. And there's a gentleman on this conversation called Cliff Boyer who will be taking over. But I am still going to be very much a part and parcel of the work of the Global Chamber. In fact, I have been for the last year and a half. And for those of you who may be new to the work of the Global Chamber, particularly in Africa, we are really a growing community of executives, CEOs, business leaders, entrepreneurs. We're, as Doug had mentioned, in most major metro regions around the world. And in Africa, we have a presence in North, South, East, and West. So from Nairobi to Nigeria, to South Africa, to North Africa. And on this call, we have many of the members of the Global Chamber, Ethiopia, South Africa, Nigeria, joining us. And really, we have a focus to help businesses grow. Our vision is really to promote cross-border trade and make it easy. And we do this through events like this. We do this through introductions to each other, through networking. We also have a wide access to trusted leaders across the continent, indeed across the world, to help you in whatever sector that you may be in. And part of this is just the development of particularly young global leaders. And so through our events, through the networking experiences that we put together on a regular basis, we are really a one-of-a-kind organization, and we are truly growing. We have an immense presence here in Africa. And, you know, whether it's helping businesses grow, whether it is bringing new knowledge, whether it is bringing experts together, like through today's event, really our focus is to accelerate entrepreneurship, business growth, and sustainable business across, particularly across this continent of Africa, which has so much potential, as we all know. So I'm really delighted to be a part of this conversation. And I'm now going to allow Courtney to take over the reins. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Derek. Great introduction of our activities in Africa. Also, I have to say you have the best webinar setup, 10 out of 10 for the microphone and the setup and the outfit, putting us all to shame. So thank you. And now to give us the big picture and to set the scene for the rest of our discussion, we're going to look at Africa's investment proposition and what's on offer. And we have an excellent expert to talk us through that. That's Nahom Tekewold, who's an international trade expert with the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa. So Nahom, if you're here, please do go ahead.
Thank you very much, Courtney. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Excellent. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me to this Pan-African session. I think the session is timely given how Africa is becoming increasingly important in the international investment discourse. A lot of things are happening in the continent that makes Africa an attractive destination for foreign direct investment. So in this intervention, I'm going to focus on 5 main reasons why Africa is the best destination for international investors. And just to start with, investing in Africa has a huge profit potential. Of course, we all know that international investors, whenever they do their investment decisions, whenever they do their assessment, it's methodologically very structured, and always there is a focus on risks associated with investing in Africa. But if we are able to think outside of the box, and if we are able to see what's happening actually on the ground in the continent, we can actually see that Africa is such a profitable continent, even because the risk is high, of course, but if companies are willing to manage their risk and take advantage of a huge market potential in the continent, the profitability of doing business in Africa is unquestionable. The second reason is that Africa's growth prospects are among the world's brightest. This is despite the COVID-19 pandemic, Russia-Ukraine war, geopolitical fragmentation, weakening of international trade and investment infrastructures. I was looking at the Africa's macro economic performance and outlook report by the African Development Bank, and according to this report, Africa is set to outperform the rest of the world in economic growth over the next 2 years, with real gross domestic product (GDP) averaging around 4% in 2023 and 2024. So this is very good news for international investors, in my opinion. So whenever there is a growth potential and when the economy can be rekindled after slowdown during the COVID pandemic and some of the challenge, of course, and the continent related to date and other issues, I think Africa's economic growth potential seems to be very bright. Of course, the third reason is that Africa's growing useful population. When we talk about Africa's useful population, we have to look at in comparison with what the demographic trend in developed advanced economies. We have an increasingly aging population in other parts of the world, especially in the northern hemisphere. And what's happening in Africa is that there is a huge use bulge, but by itself having a useful population is not enough. There should be policy instruments that can encourage the demographic dividend to happen in the continent. So there is an increasing attention on that as well. So to train African youth to take advantage of new and emerging technologies and so on. So if you go to Lagos or any other African cities, I think you can see that how the investment climate in tech industry is now growing and how African youngsters are becoming increasingly creative by developing applications which can compare with some of the great applications people in the Western countries are using. So it's all about having the right policy framework that can help African youngsters to maximize on their potential. So I have a strong belief in African youth because whatever socio-economic and political transformation we are aspiring to the continent, we have to focus on the youth.
We are so far apart.
The first reason is that Africa's large deposit of natural resources. Of course, usually the term resource curse is very much associated to what's happening to resource-rich countries in the continent. But I think we have to think about resource blessings because there are great initiatives happening. I just don't want to focus on the negativities and all the bad things that happened to the continent because of this abundance of natural resources. So if we want to change the dynamics related to natural resource, I think we have to look at the opportunities present before us. I think the first obvious opportunity that global trend in transition to green economy and most of the critical minerals which are essential for green transition are located in Africa, and it's all about the question is all about how Africa will be maximizing on it. So there are great initiatives happening at the continental level, at the national level. All of them may not be great. Some of them are, of course, leading to instability and so on. But of course, there is a thinking going on at the continental level. For instance, 2 weeks ago, I was attending the AU commodity strategy meeting, which was taking place here at the African Union Commission, and the draft African commodity strategy, which is developed by the African Union Commission in collaboration with all other stakeholders, is such an excellent document that lays down what Africa needs to do in order to maximize from its natural resources. So very hopeful that Africa will be able to maximize from natural resources. We will be having processing companies rather than just exporting raw materials to the rest of the world. If Africa is able to process its natural resources and able to create a manufacturing job to its population, I think the economic transformation of the continent is imminent. And the final reason, and something which is very close to my heart, is that the adoption, ratification, and efforts in the implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Area. Every day when I go to work, I study the FCFTA, its potential, the risks associated with how it cannot be implemented like any other great initiatives in the continent. So having seen all this, I am more optimistic than ever that when I look at the political commitment behind the agreement, how it came into picture, the AU leaders launched the negotiation back in 2015, but the idea was conceived in 2012. But within just less than 3 years, they were able to conclude such a complex trade agreement. And now the agreement is signed by 47 countries. 7 countries signed it, and they are still need to ratify it. But the AFCFTA is moving in a very high speed in the continent. So that will bring a huge opportunity for international investors. I just want to focus on one protocol, which is relevant to our discussion today, the protocol on investment. The investment protocol basically aims to establish a balanced, coherent, clear, transparent, and predictable and mutually advantageous continental framework of principles and rules for investment promotion, facilitation, and protection in the continent. So this protocol will create a predictable environment for foreign direct investment in the continent. So it's a great news for international investors, domestic investors alike, and of course for small and medium scale enterprises. Like any other places in the world, when you see the private sector composition in Africa, it is mainly dominated by
If everyone could please mute yourselves, unless you're the speaker, that would be great. Thank you. You, Nahom, you've muted yourself now. There you go. There you go.
Sorry. Good. I presented to you the 5 reasons why I think Africa is such an attractive destination for investment. And in the title of our session, it's not just about why it's an opportunity, of course, and there are inherent challenges associated to Africa at the moment that we need to address. The first one is that, of course, although the peace and security situation in Africa is improving, we have to make sure that the silencing of the gun initiative of the AU becomes a reality. So I am really hopeful that in Africa, we will be able to silence the gun so that businesses and to thrive and Africa live up to its economic potential, because it's a significant challenge in front of us at the moment, dealing with this peace and security situation. So earlier today, also, it is a public holiday in Ethiopia. I was presenting on the link between trade and peace to a WTO session virtually, which is happening in Geneva at the moment. And one of the things that I emphasized is that also there are initiatives at the continental level at the moment to create a peaceful continent. You might have heard of it. It's called the African Peace and Security Architecture. But this kind of great initiatives should be complemented by economic initiatives at the continental level, and the FCFTA can be considered as one of those economic instruments in the continent that can complement the peace and security architecture and create a peaceful and prosperous Africa. So in Africa, we need to deal with challenges associated with peace and security challenge. The second challenge I want to highlight is that the capacity constraints, of course, it's not secret that most African governments need technical support in order to implement ambitious agendas, both at the continental and national level. For instance, if you take the FCFTA, it's not an easy agreement to implement. So it requires a lot of technical assistance, support, and African countries should be able to learn from each other's experience in order to maximize on it. So we have to deal with the capacity challenge associated with this. And the final issue that I want to raise is that we need to improve our governance, of course, because the predictability and certainty of the investment climate in Africa so much depends on whether we have predictable investment environment. When you just ask the final intervention, let me just present to you some of the highlights from the Wooded Investment Report released by UNtapped recently, overviewing the investment trend in the continent in the past year, 2022. So overall, FDI in Africa has stagnated, but greenfield announcements signal potential growth. That's the message of the report when it comes to Africa. So in 2022, Africa attracted 45 billion USD FDI. Africa's FDI inflows has remained rather stagnant, however, around 45 billion mark from well before the onset of COVID-19. So the year 2021 was somehow an incremental increase. We had around 83 billion USD investment, but that's a bit deceptive because almost half of that came out of a single intra-firm transaction happened in South Africa. So that's one of the challenges we have, collecting the real data that can reflect what's happening on the ground in the continent. So despite the stagnation in FDI, robust greenfield announcements suggest long-term confidence in Africa's economy or any specific industries. Africa's hosted 6 of the top 15 greenfield mega projects. Those were more than 10 billion USD. So this is also a great achievement for the continent, and it shows how it's becoming increasingly attractive for environmentally friendly investment at the global stage. So thank you very much. I hope I was able to wrap all these points in just 10 minutes or over. To you, Courtney. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nahom. You did manage to cover a lot of ground in a short amount of time. That's great. And you pointed out some really crucial factors that we may need to explore further, not just the opportunities, but everything from governance to the regulatory environment to security, and of course, the continental trade area that are going to have a large impact on Africa's future as an investment destination. So thank you for talking us through that. And now let's hear from the investor. Yes, go ahead.
Just a quick couple things. Would you be able to give us a little bit of an outline of what you'd like to accomplish today, and in terms of not just overall, but will there be a Q&A session, and what are some of the expectations for the folks in the audience? And I do want to do a quick shout out before you answer that to both Nihi Sanusi and Shalom Bako. Nihi Sanusi has been a key global chamber member. He's our advisory board chair in Lagos, Nigeria, and he has been instrumental in putting this program together and working with Courtney and all of the speakers, I believe. So Nihi, thank you for your leadership. We really appreciate what you do. And Shalom Bako, also in Nigeria, northeastern Nigeria, north of even Abuja, who's an exporter to the United States, and around the world with hibiscus and other products. He, I think, to me, epitomizes a lot of what the future of Africa is, of young leaders who recognize the opportunity of bringing products and services to the world. So Shalom, shout out to you, and it was great to meet you again here recently in Los Angeles. So sorry to interrupt, Courtney. Just wanted to make sure everybody understood what their Q&A opportunities might be.
No, it was really good to flag that. So for the expectations, so we will be having a mini panel now on the investor perspective. Then we will have sectoral spotlights. So we'll be a brief look at key opportunities in agribusiness, renewables, manufacturing, and tech. And then there will be a group Q&A. We are saving around 15 minutes towards the end. So I'll just ask our speakers, I know these are very short slots, but if we can keep to time, that will give time for that discussion at the end without running over. And yes, I want to second the thanks to Nihi, who's really been the main point man in bringing all of this together and keeping us on track. So thank you to that. And thank you to Nihi for all of that work that you've done. And now I do want to give the floor to our investors. Really lucky to have them here, because we could sit here and speak ourselves and speculate about what we think investors want from Africa and their perspectives, but better that we hear directly. We have two two women who are very active and know all the landscape there. And I'm going to give them the floor each in turn to tell us first about what you invest in and how you make your decisions, and more importantly, how you see opportunities in Africa, what catches your eye right now, what kind of criteria you use. So I'll turn first to Dalia Cohen, who's the Chief Operating Officer and Strategic Advisor for Confluence Investors. Welcome, Dalia.
Thanks so much, Courtney, and thanks for having Confluence on the panel. We, as our name suggests, the Confluence Impact Fund, believe that it's important to do well as to do good, and so impact is a huge part of the philosophy we use for investing. So the impact themes are going to come through strongly in my delivery. But we also believe that Africa is an extremely exciting place to offer both. So the Confluence Impact Fund invests in publicly listed companies in the non-BRIC emerging markets, predominantly Africa and Southeast Asia, seeking out attractive businesses in these often overlooked markets that can deliver compelling returns as well as meaningful impact. And we are long-term investors. A lot of the impact investment going into Africa is private, and so we feel that there's a great niche and a gap in investing in the public markets. So our mission is twofold: to generate compelling financial returns while also leaving a positive mark on environment and society. And this achieves a double bottom line approach. So to become part of our investment portfolio, a company must clear not only a traditional return hurdle, but also demonstrate a contribution to the community and the society in which it operates. ESG reflects how a company conducts itself. We strongly believe in the power of environmental, social, and government principles as a guiding compass for corporate conduct. And so it's not just a buzzword for us, it is the fundamental filter through which we assess companies before further analysis. We then employ a methodology to quantify impact. And we use what we call an impact on money multiple, which assigns a dollar value to the net impact a company has on society. And we believe that the corporates can have a great impact, and only those companies that emerge as net positive contributors are eligible for investment consideration. 25% of performance fees due to management are based on our delivery of these impact goals. So our primary impact investment categories are climate action, inclusive education, financial inclusion, and quality healthcare. So this guides the corporates in which we invest. We consider Africa to offer significant opportunities for investment. So many of our investments follow a couple key themes, and that's demographic evolution and technological leap. Africa has a young population with a fast-growing demographic, and this trend creates dynamic markets and substantial growth potential. So we see huge opportunities, for example, in education and healthcare, and for those businesses which meet an underserved need and have a capital efficient model. So take Egypt, for example. In 2020, there were 20 million school and university age Egyptians. In 2030, that's predicted to be closer to 30 million. So meeting the requirement for quality, affordable education is creating opportunities. SIRA, a group we're invested in, supplies accessible education at a price point of about $1,000 per student year, and they're growing from 30,000 students to 100,000 in the next 5 years. And I have a personal soft spot for SIRA, as they started out nearly 30 years ago with the first, with the first secular school for girls in Cairo, and they've grown from there. And there's a similar story in healthcare. In financial inclusion, we see many exciting companies which are broadening or deepening the access using technology. Sometimes they're evolutions of technology companies, like the company in which we're invested in Senegal, but they are occasionally standalone businesses. And Africa has the benefit of not having any legacy technology or issues in this space, but has leapfrogged many of the developed markets. And financial inclusion supports the large, overlooked, unbanked population in a cost-efficient way, enabling people to preserve and grow their wealth. We encounter relatively little competition in the Africa-listed markets. Specifically, our long-term capital base, our focus strategy, allows us to access markets and opportunities that might be challenging for others to access due to liquidity constraints, shorter-term capital, or market accessibility issues. So our investment strategy is tailored towards the unique characteristics of each market type and allows us to optimize our approach and mitigate risks effectively. So The current countries in which we're invested are Kenya, Senegal, South Africa, and Egypt, and the sectors I've mentioned before. We do look across the whole of Africa, but we have many filters. We have an ESG filter, an impact filter, a returns filter, and then also have to really take into consider the macroeconomic environment. And so that reduces the number of companies. We have a more concentrated portfolio, which is why we're only invested in a few countries right now, but we do look across all of Africa.
Thank you very much, Dali. Really interesting to see the lens through which you make your decisions. Just a quick question. Do you anticipate maybe, I know you're open to opportunities elsewhere in Africa. Do you feel that given the kind of more positive dynamics that we're seeing across the continent, do you expect your investments to perhaps expand, or really these markets are the ones where there's currently the most potential?
No, we absolutely expect our investments to expand. We're watching a lot of different companies in a bunch of different countries, and we need the convergence of both the value to meet our the levels in which we feel comfortable investing, as well as the macroeconomic conditions to be okay. We look at, we have to look at the currency and the inputs to currency to make sure that we're a good custodian of our investors' cash.
Thank you so much. Now let's turn to Anne. Anne Wyman is a senior partner at Africa Invest, which is in the name, you can tell, has a focus on Africa. And tell us a bit about the organization. What tends to catch your eye? What do you invest in? And how do you see the current landscape in Africa from an investor perspective?
Sure, great. Thank you very much, Courtney, and thank you to the Global Chamber for inviting me to speak here today. Very much appreciate the opportunity. I, as Courtney said, work for a firm called Africa Invest. I'm actually speaking to you right now from Tunis, Tunisia, which is where the headquarters of the firm is, but we actually have locations across the continent. We are based in 4 North African countries, so Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, and Egypt, as well as across Sub-Saharan Africa as well. So we have offices in Abidjan, Lagos, Nairobi, as well as in Mauritius. And we've got a representative office in Paris as well. And we are a Pan-African investment platform. Something that started off actually 30 years ago as a primarily private equity focused firm. And we've now grown actually to have sort of a multi asset strategy that includes still very much private equity, but has also grown to include private debt. We too invest in capital markets, and we are now doing more work on blended finance, and we have a permanent capital vehicle that focuses on financial services. So quite an array of different investments that have continued to grow over the last 3 decades. Over that time period, we've raised about $2.3 billion to make these investments. We've raised that money from around the world, a lot of it from Europe, in particular European DFIs are some of our biggest partners, but we've also raised money from the continent itself, from the United States, Middle East, as well as some parts of Asia. And what our investors are looking for depends on the funds that they sit in, but I think in general they are also looking for some kind of blend similar to what was mentioned already by Dalia, which is some form of impact as well as commercial returns. And so we try to be very true to that in what we do in each of our fund strategies. It's kind of an interesting time for me to be on this call because we've literally just come off the back of our annual Investor Day here in Tunis, where we had more than 200 investors who are part of our funds. So I had an opportunity to talk to a lot of people who think about Africa and come from all around the world. And I would say the general sentiment was really quite positive about the wide range of opportunities that do exist in Africa, to be opportunities to be a part of fast-growing companies and also to be a part of impacting African lives. I'm not going to sugarcoat the fact that there is certainly a recognition that doing business in Africa is not easy. It's not getting any easier. There is everything from political interference to economic stress currency depreciation, and inflationary pressures that are shrinking disposable incomes and can eat at investment returns. And I've not even talked about climate change yet. So I think we need to be realistic about the challenges that are here. They're not only here in Africa, but they are certainly here. And it means that when you think about investing in the continent, you have to be taking all of these factors in mind and be quite diligent about your partners, particularly your local partners. That's why the African Invest model is built on being local. We don't believe in the concept of kind of fly in, fly out and invest and then come back and check in on your investments every couple of months or less. You really do need to be on the ground here, and partnership is really important to us. Where are the opportunities? They're everywhere. If you were to have attended our conference or to have heard the different panels that we gathered that included many of the entrepreneurs that we invest in, certainly around fintech, and even going so far as AI. We actually, one of our most exciting investments over the last couple of years has actually been into an AI company called InstaDeep. InstaDeep was founded here in Tunis, and over the last couple of years has had quite a lot of success, but its big claim to fame has been its contribution to the discovery of the COVID vaccine, and then was eventually bought out by BioNTech. So a very nice investment, but also one with very significant impact and returns. We do see opportunities in a lot of other service sectors as well. I think education has already been mentioned twice on this call. We too see education as a particularly relevant sector. Families across the continent are ready and willing to invest in their children's education and skills. This goes for traditional education, as well as vocational education, and then new economy skills such as coding. So we've invested, for example, in a company that's called Go My Code through our VC fund, which is incredibly successful. And so I think when we think about the concept of investment in education in Africa, it's important to think about well beyond just sort of primary and secondary education, but other ways in which Africa and Africans can be educated to help them be prepared for the next century. Healthcare is also a sector that we like very much, growing fast, delivering drugs and services, many of them actually to underserved populations. So it's another place where you get this commercial impact, but also a very important impact for African societies. We've just raised a health fund, which is called the Transform Health Fund. We're actually partway through the fundraise. And this is a blended finance fund, which actually brings in some catalytic capital. There's quite a bit of money around in the foundation and family office space that is willing to try and catalyze private capital to come in to sectors like healthcare, where we can both drive important returns, but also be sure that we are getting healthcare coverage to those who don't have it. We're getting drugs to people that don't have access, and using technology actually to expand healthcare throughout the continent. So also a really interesting sector for us. I would also want to highlight consumer-facing companies, which are providing interesting opportunities, particularly providing sort of the necessary basic goods that fuel African everyday lives. We've invested more recently in a supermarket chain in Nigeria that is providing goods to communities that have less access. Their whole model is built around serving not in the most concentrated urban areas, but creating models that allow for access to goods in less well-served areas. Of course, there are great consumer opportunities in the very large markets, like I've mentioned, Nigeria and Egypt, but I think there are a lot of interesting smart strategies that can tie these retail opportunities to other purchases, like in petrol stations, and these can be quite interesting and profitable even in smaller economies. I mentioned at the start that uncovering a lot of these African possibilities requires exceptional due diligence and high governance standards and lots of elbow grease. But at AfriCinvest, I think we are convinced that it's worth it. 30 years worth of experience tells us that it's worth it. And so I'm happy to dig into any of these sectors when we get to the question and answer, or any of the other sectors we invest in later on. But I'll leave it for there at this point. Thanks, Courtney.
Thank you so much, Anne. It's really great to hear all the sectors and areas of interest to you. And I think we will delve into several of them. You mentioned about fintech and AI, and we will talk about tech a bit later. And yes, and it's great if you can stick around for the Q&A, because I have some more questions for you, and I'm sure others will. So thank you so much for that. Now we will get into our sectoral spotlights. To talk us through agribusiness, we have Comey Clue, who's a principal at AgriCap, also has a wealth of experience in the financial industry and is working across several sectors on the continent, and also is an expert in the due diligence, which is something Anne just mentioned as being critical in Africa. But Comey, can you give us a kind of a quick look at what is going on in agribusiness in Africa and what should we be looking out for?
Okay, Courtney, can you hear me? Thank you for that introduction. And I thank everybody and all the speakers who have been before me. Speaking of impact investing, investing in food production is what I call the most impactful investment you can make in Africa. I'm going to start with introducing myself. I'm Comey. Like Courtney already said, I am the chair. I'm the chairman of the advisory board for Global Chamber in Accra. So why should anybody be interested in investing in agribusiness in Africa? Because of opportunity, but not just because of opportunities. And investing in agribusiness in Africa offers the double bottom line of impacting the lives of people and making profit, a huge profit. Let me share a success story with you. I call it the cassava success story. For anybody who does not know, cassava is a tuber that is used mostly in Africa, in most foods. Chief among them is the fufu, which is like a staple food that is eaten all across Africa. This staple food, this crop has not been valued until the COVID-19 hit, when global supply chain was challenged and food imports cannot go on as previously. People realize that they can now rely on the local crops to feed themselves, because nothing is coming in from outside. So the young entrepreneur in Cameroon started to bake the bread with cassava as opposed to wheat and wheat flour. It was hugely successful that it just caught on across the continent. And there is a young Ghanaian entrepreneur who saw that opportunity. So he started selling cassava flour across Ghana. And the good news is he had an off-take agreement with some large processing plants. And he started going around the village to aggregate the cassava tuber and cassava flour to take to the processing plants. It was so successful. But now he needs money to grow his business. He needs to the tune of $5 million to grow his business. I call this the cassava flour success story, just to lay the background of, to lay the ground on what is at stake in Africa. When we are investing in foods, we are touching lives, and there's a huge profit to be made. What kind of profit are we talking about? First of all, the African continent has 1.3 billion people. And food importation in 2020, or in 2020, 2021 was around 5 billion. Today, around 30 billion. Today, it is 50 billion. It is projected to grow to 110 billion by 2030. 130 billion US dollars by 2030. That is the type of number we're talking about. And because the population is growing, and because we have to feed our growing population, it's just a no-brainer for anybody who wants to make impact in Africa to invest in agriculture and specifically in agro-processing. I'm glad the two speakers, Dalia and Anne, have spoken about due diligence and risk management. That's one of the things I want to touch on. It's very important to understand that it is challenging to do business in Africa. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. There are some huge challenges, and specifically in the agro value chain, there are some serious challenges relative to the strength of the value chain. For instance, how do you transport the crop from this place to another place? The roads are bad. And how do you ensure that you secure, if you are into farming, post-harvest waste or losses? So you have to think holistically and think about ways you can mitigate those risks and those challenges. If you're able to do that, you should be successful. And the numbers are just mind-boggling. And in addition to that, some additional risk mitigation opportunities that are in the African, that we can utilize in the African agro value chain, agricultural insurance, microcredit for the people that you use, that you are working with. Now, what are the specific opportunities? I have some actionable insights.
Okay, we'll have to wrap up in a minute or two, but we definitely want to hear these insights. So I just wanted to give a heads up.
Yes, okay. I have some actionable insights. Large-scale agro-processing is like in high demand in Africa. We need to transform the food so that we can process them and we can commercialize them. Renewable energy in agriculture. As you know, most farms and most processing centers are in remote areas, so they are not connected to the grids. So renewable energy is another area of opportunity. And the promotion of sustainable agriculture. Everybody wants to eat, want to support green agriculture, and everybody is really interested in buying food that is well prepared, that is well organic foods. So there's a huge demand for that also. We have specific shovel-ready agro projects. We talked about renewable energy already. Poultry farming is a big opportunity. We have some opportunities in Nigeria and in Togo. Corn commercialization is already produced, but it needs aggregators, it needs financing and transport to commercialize that. We talked about cassava processing also. And last but not least is fish farming and processing. Huge opportunities in Ghana and in Zambia. So in closing, the opportunities are there. Anybody who is interested can reach out to us, but we need to do our homework so that we can seize the opportunity.
Warning in progress.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And a good overview of the various opportunities in the sector and the importance of linking it. It is the ultimate impact investment industry in a way. And Comey is working, I know, has a pipeline of investable projects in this area and also in renewable energy, which is something we're going to be working on and have more info on in the future. So stay tuned for that. And now, speaking of renewables, we will have our sectoral spotlight on renewable energy. And I'm really delighted that we have Chigozie Nweke Eze with us. He's the CEO of a company called Integrated Power, which he can tell us about. I met Chigozie because he was on a panel that I moderated at an international investment event in Frankfurt last week or the week before last. and he was speaking very eloquently, in particular, about the potential of green hydrogen, but I think we'll be able to give us a broader view as well. Chigozie, first tell us very quickly about your company and activities, but more importantly, what's the big potential for renewables in Africa?
Yeah, thank you so much, Courtney. Very nice to see you here again, and also to join these very interesting events. I think that is very practical, talking about investment in Africa. As you've just begun to mention, one of my biggest focuses in the energy sector when it comes to the African continent. And of course, Integrated Africa Power itself is well focused on the energy sector in Africa, and we have 4 units. One is that we conduct studies because we feel that it's very important to build evidence and to conduct market research. I mean, for investors, of course, before investors get into a market, they want to understand it. They want to know which market they're going into. And also for macroeconomic planning of energy policies or being even aware. I've been in many rooms where many policies were made in different African countries when it comes to the energy sector. So we help in doing energy studies. We also help give consulting services based on these studies, of course, to private firms, to investors, and to institutions. Also, we've advised a number of European development financial institutions as well. And also we play that role of connecting investors to then projects, real projects on the ground. And this is why we do have pipelines of projects in the energy sector, renewable energy sector, that we always, maybe we've already approved that this is a very impactful project, and we're able to say, okay, investors, you can consider that or that. And of course, in the for sometimes we find ourselves also particularly really invested in co-investing in projects so that we kind of monitor the whole process to make sure that the sustainability principles that we have there is still intact. So sometimes we do have cases where we are co-equity investors ourselves and so on and so forth. So what is interesting is that we are really broadly involved in African continent. So that includes, we have offices actually in Nigeria, in Kenya, in South Africa. Of course, in Germany is where we seek to coordinate our global office to make sure that there is that connection. There's a lot of things to say about the African energy sector, but I can assure you that everyone knows the problem that we have when it comes to energy access and electricity access, how this problem of energy and electricity access has really stifled economic growth and industrialization, stifled socioeconomic development in all indices you can think about, health, education, well-being, think about that. And the fact that there has been a lot of efforts channeled into this to solve this problem from the public sector, not as much yet from the private sector. And this is also one thing that we want to highlight here, and I'm happy that I'm speaking to investors. Of course, there are certain roles that investors can actually play in this sector. There are many innovations coming up now, African-specific innovations, financing innovations that allows private investors to come in a more relaxed manner. We agree that there are certain, in some areas, risks, but of course, there are so many risk mitigation strategies and ideas, that mainly coming from public sector grants from development financial institutions, that then prepares the way for private finance to come in a very comfortable manner, and so on and so forth. So a lot of trends are growing in Africa. That's where you can, according to Global Trends yesterday, I was also in IRENA, where I was talking about huge potentials in the continent. When you talk of high renewable energy potentials, when you talk of natural resources, and of course, when you also talk of critical raw minerals, which is very key for the technologies for renewable energies. And of course, not to forget the booming young skills that are also available to be trained and retrained and to offer job opportunities. So all of these things are available that makes any resource you can think about, whether it's production of electricity, whether it is production of green hydrogen, as to be the most cost-effective destination. Then it comes down then to the question of like making it possible. So to conclude, because I'm aware that my 5 minutes must have been coming down now. We're available to have further discussions. Feel free to contact me, and we can have discussion. But I'm saying that there is opportunity in the energy sector and there is opportunity for private investors to come in very comfortably in mini grid systems, in schools, in health sector, and in business complexes. This is in decentralized solutions. There are also huge opportunities in centralized systems when it comes to grid. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Chigozie. And what you're pointing out, especially about the access to electricity, is the kind of virtual circle that inward investment can play, because investment can help solve some of the energy needs and constraints of Africa that actually stymie it from attracting further investment. So it is quite an opportunity. Thank you so much. And now I'll turn to Rekik Bekele, who's a founder and CEO of Green Scene Ethiopia and a Global Chamber member. Tell us a little bit about what you do and give us your perspective.
Thank you, Courtney, and the Global Chamber for letting me to be part of this conversation today and explore the remarkable investment opportunity present in Africa, specifically in the clean energy sector. Just to quantify a little bit, everybody said the huge potential. Yes, it's really a lot and immense potential. With over 60 million off-grid individuals in Ethiopia alone, and 600 million across Africa, which is more than the population of the whole of Europe, just for you to imagine it. It's living in off-grid. There is a significant investment opportunity, just to add. As a co-founder and CEO of Green Scene Energy, we have been providing clean, affordable, and reliable solar energy solutions since 2016, which is our establishment. With our current focus on developing IPP project and local assembly, we are well positioned to take the advantage of growing demand for clean energy in Ethiopia and across the continent. Our track record speaks for itself, with over 9,000 standalone solar home systems sold, such as solar appliances, including lighting home solutions and solar water pumping solutions for irrigation systems, and successful collaboration with the Ethiopian government and actually institutions such as microfinance institutions and banks. We implemented solar mini grid projects. We're just concluding some of them now. We're also talking to quite a number of investors for investment consideration to further expanding our capabilities. We have been speaking actually for the last 1 year. One of the challenges doing business in Africa is like investors are not actually coming to get stacking, rather like we have experienced it as like investors are actually like circling us around, seeing like, oh, who's gonna come first? Who's gonna come and take the opportunity first, and so on. Yes, Naho mentioned it and said it really well, as there are a role of challenges and risk, which is really high, but that's why the opportunity is so massive. And it needs an innovative, local-driven approach, and it's necessary. And what makes it exciting and different now is there is youth entrepreneurs and government are playing a big role. Like companies like us, basically. Let's take Ethiopia, because Ethiopia is my home country, and that's what I know the most. Like many of other African countries, hold vast untapped potential in the sector, such as agribusiness, renewable energy, manufacturing, and technology. The Ethiopian government is actively working to attract foreign direct investment and create favorable investment environment. To mention an exciting development in this regard is just like 2 weeks ago, there was a directive released by the National Bank of Ethiopia, which which simplifies the process of opening and operating offshore accounts for strategic foreign direct investment projects, which was not there before. And this is the objective is just to attract investment across various sectors, boosting public goods and increase foreign exchange inflow. In the power and energy sector specifically, there has been significant advancement. In July 2023, just 2 months ago, 2 FDI energy companies become the first companies to receive foreign currency guarantees, demonstrating the government's commitment to supporting and welcoming foreign investment in the energy sector, renewable energy sector. In addition, Ethiopia's prioritization of power and energy project, along with provision of foreign currency guarantees, demonstrate the government's dedication to attracting investment and building a sustainable energy industry. They also, but just not only the power sector, but also the farming sector. About 5 months ago, the Ethiopian Ministry for Irrigation and Lowland, the minister announced that their decision of importing and only solar water pumps, which is basically not allowing fuel pumps. So government is really dedicating for renewable energy and investment. So it's a big step. So they are opening up for investors, foreign direct investors, supporting the entrepreneurs. We by ourselves as well importing, solar water pump irrigation solutions. We're not paying any VAT or tax. We're importing it completely for free so that it could be accessible for the farmers, but also it's easier for entrepreneurs as well. So I would say huge challenge, but big improvement from the government side on policy and environment on the business aspect. So I think it's time. It's time now for investors rather than looking at or surrounding African investment landscape, rather just come and get stuck in, but actually be innovative, collaborate with the local entrepreneurs, and find out its own way. A different approach is really necessary. So yeah, thank you so much. I conclude here.
Thank you very much. Some good sort of calls to action to end on, and it's good that you've pointed out the relevance of actually the roles that governments play in that enabling environment, but also the support schemes that they can offer, and also a good case study of your own company. So thank you very much. Now we'll turn to manufacturing, and if we're sort of racing through the program now at this point, it's because I'm a little conscious of time, and we do want to have our time for questions. So for our last few speakers, you'll have the challenge to be very succinct. But first, we have a pre-recorded intervention, and that's because Dr. Martin G. Casper is a really useful voice to hear here. He's the head of corporate development of an automotive supplier based in Germany. He's also a global FDI expert with a PhD in the topic. He is a guy in his company that actually decides where his company puts manufacturing plants, so real FDI decision maker. He wanted to join us, but had a clash. So we sat down for a conversation a few weeks ago so that we could capture his thoughts, which we will play for you now. I guess if Caesar is able to roll that video.
Different groups of people see the world in very different ways, and sort of there's a government perspective, there's an IPA perspective, and there's a corporate perspective. And if I can have a very unapologetic, very direct corporate perspective on Africa, or more to the point, why investors do not invest in Africa, I'd like to talk about specifics. And I mean, this is not meant to provoke or to insult. And there are certainly other ways of looking at it. But if I take my corporate hat on and if I look at it in the terms of investment, this would probably be some of the thoughts I'd be having about Africa. And if you think about it in a concrete example, if you think about it in terms of the BMWs, the Toyotas, the Teslas of this world, there are great opportunities, but also reasons why things don't pan out as they should. And for a country, the benefit of an automotive plant is not only sort of the big plant where you get thousands of jobs, but it is also the entire ecosystem around that and sort of all the many suppliers, which on account of just in time really need to be very close by. And that is an opportunity for a country to really turn one's fortunes around. Well, basically in theory, not necessarily in practice. And there is one good example, and that would be Morocco. And Morocco managed to attract about 220,000 jobs. They have this enormous ecosystem of 240, 250 tier 1 and tier 2 suppliers. And that is really changing the fortunes of the country. But it probably won't happen, or fairly certainly won't happen in sub-Saharan Africa. Certainly not as long as the continent is structured the way it is. And there are simple economic reasons for that. I mean, the minimum capacity for an automotive plant is, at the very least, 80,000 vehicles, better 100,000. And for the OEM alone, that requires an investment of between 200 and 250 million for a small plant. And if you're thinking about the big plants like, I don't know, Tesla in Berlin, that's easily up to €1 billion. So if I'm spending between 250 million euros to €1 billion, the key driver for me would be a massive domestic market where I could sell my products. And that is the reason why the ecosystems of the automotive industry, they are in Shanghai, they're in Austin, they're in Detroit, they're in Wolfsburg, they're in Munich, but not in Africa. And admittedly, Africa has some small activities in that regard. I mean, you have South Africa and you have, as mentioned, Morocco. But I would argue Morocco is slightly a different case in as much as the majority of the output goes straight into the European Union. I mean, that can't be taken as a standard model. But if we think about sub-Saharan Africa, there are countries that have really good fundamentals. I mean, take Rwanda, take Botswana. Stable political countries, relatively good rankings on the ease of doing business index. And there's still no automotive plants there. I mean, have we ever thought about why that is? I mean, after all, Africa is a continent of 1 billion people. That would be a massive market. In reality, Africa is a continent of 54 different countries. 54 relatively small countries, and who mostly dislike each other quite violently, and hence try everything in their power to stop import or export across their borders. And that really makes it very difficult for big investors. I mean, not only do you have a relatively difficult logistical infrastructure, but you also have customs procedures that effectively prevent cross-border trade, and you have regulatory regimes that literally suck up all the energy and all the time. So I mean, even the simplest of things takes, I don't know, a week to be done. And quite frankly, if we're trying to make Africa a more attractive investment location, that could be something that could be done relatively quickly and relatively easily, if only the political will would be there. And sort of briefly going back to those 250 million euros to 1 billion euro, if I have to spend that sort of money, I go to China because I have 1.4 billion consumers there. I go to the European Union because I have 500 million customers there with, equipped with massive purchasing power. Or I go to USMCA, sort of the former NAFTA area, 450 million customers. And on the other side, in Africa, I have countries with 10 or 15 million consumers, moderate purchasing power. I mean, that is just not a business model for that sort of investment. And if you think about that, we're not only talking about automotive plants. If we're talking about the type of investment that is going on at the moment, that is battery plants, from the fundamentals, Africa would be fantastically placed, but the sums you need to invest are even bigger. By the sheer practicality logic, Africa should have a massive slice of those sort of investments. In reality, they're just not there. And to sort of illustrate what I'm referring to is, even if you take the biggest market in Africa, Nigeria, they even can't go it alone. I mean, Nigeria had in the 1970s and 1980s a whole range of different automotive plants. I mean, there was Mercedes-Benz, there was Peugeot, there was Volkswagen, there was Leyland. But in the end, most of them have left, simply because even Nigeria isn't big enough a market on its own. And as long as you try to protect 54 relatively small markets, Africa effectively kills the possibility of attracting a major mega project to the continent as a whole. And the African Continental Free Trade Zone is a first great step, but you need to breathe life into it for it to really work, for it really to happen. Because I think otherwise the continent is kicking itself out of the race. And to illustrate what I'm saying, if you take the example of Côte d'Ivoire, Côte d'Ivoire is the biggest supplier of natural rubber in Africa, and at the same time is importing 85% of its tires from China, simply because there are no production capacities domestically. So Africa as a continent is blessed with enormous resources. And if those issues are addressed, it could be getting far more than sort of the meager 1.5% of global FDI flows it's scraping at the moment. Actually, Africa should be a major destination. And it works. I mean, we can see that in the digital world, where you have unicorns like Jumina or Flatterware. But when it comes to manufacturing, when it comes to industrial processes, you need to have certain conditions in place. And I think it's well worth thinking about that, because it is in manufacturing where you generate the majority of the jobs to keep people employed. And maybe a very brief last word on that point. Manufacturing jobs need an element of know-how, of human capital. Africa at the moment is dominated by the informal sector. And they say up to 80% of businesses are in the informal sector. But as a consequence, people do not have firm employment contracts and hence are not trained up. So you never generate the human capital that is necessary to move beyond sort of the simple low value add production capabilities. So in that respect, Africa has some fantastic opportunities, has some fantastic preconditions to start with. It should have a really bright future. From a manufacturing perspective at the moment, it certainly doesn't.
Okay, so a kind of big dose of realism from Dr. Casper there, but I think it is important to have this perspective for balance with, the undeniable potential weighed against what's potentially currently anyway holding Africa back from being a heavyweight in manufacturing and attracting some of those most sought after automotive and other large projects. So would like to say thank you to Martin for sharing his candor and his time. Now, again, I'm very worried about our timing, so I'm afraid our next speakers will have to be quite succinct. But Victor Agola, who's the Chief Digital Officer at Nairobi City Council, is currently focused, as you can tell, on digital activities and industries, but has a policy research background, so can speak very well about any sector really relevant to Africa, but maybe has something he can share, especially about innovation in Africa as it relates to manufacturing. Is Victor here? No. Last chance, Victor? Okay, well, he's got, I assume, another engagement. That claws us back a little bit of time, and we will turn our attention rapidly to tech, which has been referenced in a few of our speeches earlier. A clear opportunity for Africa. You even heard Martin Casper speak just now about some of the successes in the tech sector in Africa. Gilbert Eweme, if you're here, is a continental coordinator for Accelerate Africa and is working to actually bring in investment and to promote startups and grow entrepreneurship on the continent. I'm not seeing your face. Gilbert, yes, you are here. What can you tell us about the prospects for tech investment in Africa, and how can we grow the entrepreneurial and startup community there? It looks like you're there but muted.
Courtney, thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting me on this very important panel. I think the last speaker, Dr. Curley, if I'm right, I really appreciate his frank conversation, which is what is happening in Africa. I think Africa has a lot of potentials, but a lot of opportunities, but still with a lot of challenges. Now, the tech ecosystem in Africa, there is still a huge opportunity in that. He made mention as well, we have close to 80% of the startups or SMEs who are in the informal sector, and close to 70% of these guys, they are into tech-related issues. When I talk about tech, you talk about agri-tech, you talk about edutech, renewable tech, and all those things put together. But unfortunately, a lot of these guys in the FDI, they focus more on the giant companies, and they tend to neglect the very startup founders who are the core for the African continent. And most importantly, you evaluate that in Africa. We talk about Africa, we have a lot of challenges when it comes to digital divide, infrastructure development, and so on, which is a huge problem. Visiting close to 20 countries across Africa, I can truly tell you just about 3-4 countries, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, with better connectivity when it comes to technology. You have Rwanda, you have Kenya, and maybe I'm having some background noise. So I'm going to proceed. So we have all of this, and our key mandate at Accelerate Africa is focusing on these startup founders, which they make close to 80% of them. And our key role is to migrate them from informal to formal, because this is where the really job creation need to be focused. But unfortunately, like I said earlier, close to 70% of these startup founders are into tech-related industries. But unfortunately, we lack the digital infrastructure. You talk about connectivity. In Cameroon, where I come from, it's a very big challenge. And just a few days ago, I was following a post from one of a friend in Ghana who was complaining about telecoms companies in Ghana, which have very bad connectivity. And it's the same story across Africa. So I think investors need to focus more on the digital transformation for Africa. If you want to talk about economic transformation, let's focus on digital transformation, which is the key, and there is a huge potential in the sector. So I'm going to invite all the stakeholders, all the foreign direct investors to see how.
Go ahead, Gilbert.
Yes, so that's where our key mandate is. And, you know, we are talking about industrialization. We are talking about the African Continental Free Trade Area. We are talking about the African Continental Free Trade Area, which is a big opportunity, vast opportunity. But unfortunately, we don't have free movement in Africa. Free movement is still a big challenge. So we cannot have a successful implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Area without free movement. So all the stakeholders need to come on board. We need to influence. We need to push the African Union to start implementing some of these key policies that could attract more of foreign direct investment into Africa. I appreciate the panelists from Ethiopia. Visiting Ethiopia a couple of times, I think they have a very good model and good digital infrastructure, which if we scale it across Africa, is going to benefit all of these young people, the startup founders that we work with them across the continent. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gilbert. And you're quite right. Without all the stakeholders coming together, we really can't achieve anything. And hopefully, you know, these kinds of conversations are useful. You also make the very astute point that when we talk about FDI, we get very sidetracked talking about the big investments and the large companies and mega investments, which are relevant. But when it comes to tech, usually the exciting developments and the stars usually start out small. And that does create an opportunity for Africa to grow its own tech champions. So thank you for that. Now I'm turning to our final speaker. It's not easy to be the last speaker, especially when we're getting very close to the end. But it's really important that we hear from Meseret Warner, CEO and founder of Ignite Investment, and also active Global Chamber representative. Meseret, what would you maybe perhaps like to share based on what you've heard from the other speakers and help us kind of tie a bow on our discussion here?
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. That's the risk, being last. I think it's also an opportunity. I think tech is the bright spot in Africa. African startups attracted about $5 billion in 2021 from venture capital, and also about 6.4 in last year. And most of it is tech. 60–70% of that investment is tech, even though that's just 2% of the global venture capital market. And it's expected to grow actually 32% in the next few years, the next 7 years, to all the way $65 billion in the African tech sector. So somebody mentioned already Flutterwave and Della. Flutterwave is actually the biggest valued tech company in Africa with 3 billion valuation, the last raise. So the tech is the brightest spot, as I said. But also, it's not just fintech, even though everybody loves fintech. Everyone is investing on fintech, and I know that even the other investors said about fintech. But there is huge opportunity, like everybody was saying. Rekik saying that the irrigation, manufacturing, everybody mentioned, Africa being over like a billion population. And African population, 80% of it is still living in a countryside depending on agriculture. So agri-tech is another huge investment opportunity if we look at into the other side of tech. We shouldn't be just focused on fintech, and where everybody is investing about 60–70% of the money going into fintech. Medtech is another one, because most African population still lives in countryside, being disconnected from infrastructure. We can actually capitalize on getting healthcare access through innovation. So Zipline out of Rwanda is a huge huge example where blood access and medications and others are being dropped by drones. So there is a huge opportunity in tech, but let's expand and see Africa tech environment, especially the African young people are actually taking Africa's humongous challenges that everybody is talking about and making them opportunities. So like Africa jumped from landline to mobile, now we're jumping from not having bank account to mobile payment. And a lot of leapfrogging is happening because of the tech innovation, AI, machine learning. But we should also look into beyond the fintech, into agriculture, med tech, and logitech is another one that has amazing opportunity, especially with AFCFTA being ratified and a lot of African countries getting connected, especially the SME sector that we heard about from everybody. And that expansion from the logitech is where there is a huge opportunity in the tech sector. So for me, of course, I'm biased. I am in the tech sector, but we ourselves from Ignite Investment are actually also innovating the investment environment in Africa by focusing on the African diaspora to become investors in Africans themselves, because we are sending over $80 billion every single year into the continent as remittances, and we are targeting them through equity crowdfunding platform where they would be able to finance amazing opportunities that everybody was talking about up to now. So I will just stop there and allow everybody else to have opportunities to questions.
Thank you so much. You gave us some great insights there, and thank you for being succinct. But I'm glad we were able to hear from you. Now we're wrapping up. I do want to throw in at least one question that we've had from quite active participant in the chat. That's Jacob Dietz. We heard a few references to the informal sector, and we can't really ignore that still looms quite large in Africa. So Jacob asked, and this is a question open to any of our speakers or indeed participants, how do we embrace and invest in the informal sector? So, how do we actually connect the informal sector with the formal? Who feels that they have something to contribute to answer that question? Feel free to jump in.
Hi, this is Dahlia. I think there is a lot of investment going on in the informal sector. There's been a lot of investment in fintech, which has been leading to financial inclusion. And with the leapfrogging of technology to Africa going directly to mobile phones, there is the ability to reach people in remote areas. I know Jacob specifically asked also about savings groups. And in a prior life, I worked at Econet and oversaw EcoCash, which was the second largest mobile money business in Africa. And we did a huge study on savings groups. And the one thing to remember with those is that there's a soul to them, and they don't want to be completely technical, because a lot of the value to them is the community of connecting, or that daily trip to the bank, or they're coming together to have discussions. And so there's a fine line there. There's also a lot of healthcare happening via mobile phone. There are a lot of companies that are starting to bring access to remote areas to people who can't physically, geographically, or financially access healthcare by bringing a lot via mobile phones. So I do believe that on the venture side, there is a huge amount of investment and focus on the informal sector. I don't know if that answers your question at all, but I'm seeing a lot of it.
Thank you, Dahlia. That's a really great answer, and good to have your perspective on that. And I'm afraid that is it for the questions. I'm sorry that we have this abbreviated Q&A, but it's always a little hard to pack in so many speakers into a 90-minute program, but they're all fantastic. So I want to say thank you to all of you who took your time to join us and share your insights and experiences. And at this point, I'd like to hand back over to our fearless leader of the Global Chamber, Doug, to wrap things up.
Thank you, Courtney. Fearless, global, and unstoppable. And I think what we heard today are a group of really extraordinary global and unstoppable leaders we started this conversation by saying, and I kind of referenced the China example of being there 35 years ago. And what we saw in China 35 years ago was lots of potential, but really not so much, certainly nothing like what is today. And I think what's going to happen in Africa is going to be China times 10 potentially, and in a much quicker time frame. The population growth of China, of Africa, the opportunities in Africa, including raw materials, the proximity of Africa to markets, the interaction of the diaspora that's been referenced here today, are all working in Africa's favor. And so thank you, all of you, for speaking. Thank you for participating today. And Courtney, thank you for the collaboration, for leading us through this conversation of so much information. I would like, if you don't mind, for Nihi to have maybe the last word. Nihi Sanusi in Lagos, Nigeria, who's our board chair, the Global Chamber Lagos, Nigeria Advisory Board Chair. Nihi, you've been so instrumental in pulling this together. Thank you very much. And one of the things that you, Courtney, and I have chatted about is making this an ongoing conversation, because it's not like a one and done. This is something that's going to be with us every day of the future. What final comments do you have, please?
Yeah, thank you, Doug. Thank you, Courtney. Thank you, speakers, and really appreciate the presence of everyone here. I think because this has to be a continuing engagement, we'll have to create a structure to even have investment opportunities flow. I mean, we've had that discussion with Courtney privately. She's also mentioned it, which there's a pipeline of investments coming in between her and Komi. I think Chigozie has also said things like that, and I believe Komi has emphasized that. I think that's the next phase. We'll continue with the discussions, but at the same time, going simultaneously with that will be the key things. I think it's basically almost like investment boots on ground. So it's not just a talk show, but actually see things happen on the ground. So on that note, I think this is just one of a series that will show up, and they'll be structured in very different ways so that we have bite and we have results at the end of the day. Thank you very much, Doug.
Sounds good. Courtney, what are your observations based on what you heard today, and what would you like to do next?
Yes, well, it was, I think the tangible steps is the important thing, as just mentioned. I mean, it's clear the opportunity is there, the interest is there. One of the constraints we often hear is about the right information on investable projects. So that's why we're going to be working hard in the next weeks and months to really bridge this gap between investors' needs for information and the opportunities on the ground. And that will involve creating pipelines of projects, but also continuing to facilitate these discussions with investors and project owners and other experts. So this was a great first step, but just a first step. So thank you all for being here and being a part of it. And of course, thank you for the Global Chamber for the collaboration.
Thanks, everybody. You have a great rest of your day. This will be on a recording that we'll have, and watch the member newsletter in the next week or two for that if you'd like to check in. And certainly encourage all of you to connect up with all the speakers in LinkedIn, and certainly the folks that are in the room here that even were not speaking are extraordinary in their interactions with the business community across Africa. Thanks, everybody. Salam and Lainey, I see, and Jacob, thanks for your questions. Anita, you're extraordinary. Thank you for all of your leadership as well. Komi, every time you speak, I get smarter. So thank you very much for all that you do, whether you're in Ghana or whether you're in Dover, Delaware. It doesn't matter. It's all very important. Thanks, everybody. Take care. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Nihi. Really appreciate what you've done today. That was great.
Oh, thank you, Doug. Thank you. Without you, we couldn't have gotten anything done. Really
I think
appreciate
we
it.
had around 55 people right around the peak. So that was awesome, and it was well attended, and so and certainly the speakers were extraordinary thanks to Courtney and your coordination.
Yes, well, we're still recording, and I'm sure I'll still speak with you at the back end, so we see how we can improve even better, get better results from futures.
Absolutely. Great news that you got your LinkedIn profile back as well.
Thank you. Yes, I did. I was a bit worried initially, but I'm glad it's back. Thank you very much. Thank you for even spotting and letting me know. I appreciate that.
Let's circle back and talk about next steps for Lagos, but also for this event as well.
Sure, definitely.
Yeah, can I introduce you to one of the speakers, or not the speakers, but this is let's see, hold on. So I have to put on. So this is Ruth, and how do you pronounce your last name?
Emmanuel.
Ruth Emmanuel. I met her only like a week ago in Los Angeles at the Going Global Live in Los Angeles, and she's from Ethiopia originally, and she's living here in Los Angeles, and so we're just about to have a conversation. I think you listened in. She was on the call for a little bit.
That's why I was a few minutes late, because I couldn't get off. It was such an interesting conversation.
But were you from Ethiopia originally? Were you born there?
Born, raised in Toronto.
In Toronto. Okay.
Yeah.
So another foreign country.
Yeah.
So
To meet you all.
Nihi is
I feel like I'm connected to Meseret on LinkedIn. But I don't know. I'm not connected with everybody else.
okay, because she's also from Ethiopia.
I've actually followed some of her work. So
Yeah, we ended the meeting a few minutes ago. So I saw Nihi is our board chair for Lagos, and he's just been an extraordinary member. And we talked about this. How long has it been since you've been putting this one together? Probably about 2 months, I think.
It's about 2 or 3. Yes, about 2 or 3. Yes.
well, congratulations. I listened in. It was really great.
Oh, thank you for listening in, but congratulations to Doug as well. He's the one behind all this.
You have a good rest of your day. Thank you for your time.
Thank
and
you.
Good job today.
All right. Thank you very much. Bye-bye, Rose.
Bye. Nice meeting you.